Hello and welcome to the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. And at any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page. And those do include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout this session and all sessions today, simply type into the Q&A chat and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Eric Helmer, SVP and Chief Technology Officer at Rimini Street. We are so excited to have Eric with us for a thought leadership presentation titled Delivering Innovative Business Outcomes by Evolving Your Technology Funding Model. Welcome, Eric, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining me here today. Like we said, we want to talk today about how we can deliver innovative business outcomes by evolving your technology funding. And really what I'm going to talk about is a self-funding model by turning IT departments from cost centers into profit centers. And I'll give you a couple of tools and things to think about and how you can go ahead and accomplish that. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Rimini Street. And if you are not familiar with Rimini Street, we started our company back in 2005, and we headed out to solve a very major problem. And that is that companies pay a massive amount of money in support and maintenance on enterprise software and those vendors. When I say enterprise software, I mean software solutions from things like SAP and Oracle and IBM and Microsoft and things like that, where when you buy these software packages, companies then have to pay an annual maintenance for that, for their annual support, sometimes between 20 to 23, 25% of what their spend was. And they're really not getting a lot of value out of that relationship. You're calling for support, you're not getting the people that you need, you're in constant escalation, or they just send you a bunch of documentation and you have to do it yourself. And it's just not a really great experience for the amount of money that people are spending. So we set out to solve that problem. So our customers no longer renew their annual support and maintenance contracts with those vendors, and they get a better support experience with Rimini Street, where when people call with a high severity ticket, we have people not only answering the phone, but actually logging directly into your system, fixing those problems on an average of about 90 seconds. And we do a lot more than the vendors as well: tax and legal and regulatory updates, support for customizations and integrations, and how-to questions and support questions and things of that sort. So it's a very much of a get a heck of a lot more and pay a heck of a lot less. Now, over the years, we've expanded our portfolio of services from that vendor replacement support into other things like full managed services and outsourcing as well, as far as that we call Rimini Manage. And then we have a suite of solutions around security, specifically around those ERP platforms around Oracle, like EBS, PeopleSoft, and SAP. You have ECC or S4, and most all of the major ERP and enterprise softwares and databases there. Plus security solutions, interoperability solutions, observability solutions, and then all of that is incorporated with a full professional services and consulting division as well. So you can think all things ERP, all things enterprise software is where we play. And our support model is 50 to 90% of a discount compared to what you pay the vendors today. Okay. So let's just kind of talk a little bit about where we are in this world of ERP. And I travel all over the world. I speak at a lot of Gartner events and other events as well. And I try to keep my ear to the ground as far as what's going on, what people are talking about, what are keeping CIOs up at night. And right now, it's very, very clear what people are talking about now and the conundrums that we're in right now. And the first and foremost things that people are talking about now, as you can imagine, is that the world is completely changing and completely unpredictable right now, with the wars and pandemics and sanctions and rising inflation rates, labor shortages, and supply chain problems, cybersecurity nightmare that we're in. All of these kinds of things are putting companies in a natural defensive position to brace for impact and prepare for the worst. And they need to be able to remain agile so that when and if something happens, that they can very quickly manipulate and maneuver without it being catastrophic, right? So I'm going to show you some tools and how people are going about doing that. At the same time, profitability and growth are always top of mind, of course, but really what's happening now is a focus on protecting profitability and growth in these uncertain times, which changes things a little bit slightly, right? So we want to be able to brace for that impact and may be able to ensure that we're still protecting that profitability and growth engines when things might be happening. And at the same time, we've got to figure out how that happens in this backdrop of how the ERP vendors today, both Oracle and SAP and others, right, are trying to convince you to abandon your perpetual ownership software licenses that you have today, throw that into the trash, and then completely re-implement into their software as a service rented tenant model and re-implement everything from scratch onto their cloud models. And we've got to figure out if that's really the right thing for us. And if not, what are our alternatives to that? And at the same time, all this stuff is that we need to be agile and quick to change. We need to invest in other priorities as well, right? So not only do we have to have profitability and growth, we have to invest in other things. Things I hear a lot about is improving the customer experience and investing in cybersecurity and innovation and differentiation. And we've got to figure out a way of how we can optimize what we have today and innovate where it's needed at the same time so that we can continue to evolve. So that's the backdrop that we're in. So now we've got to figure out, with that, what do we do with all this stuff, right? So this is really the world that Rimini Street lives in, and we're really trying to figure out now, how does this evolve with that backdrop of profitability and growth, bracing for impact and change. So I'm going to go through that, and really a good first step of that is to understand this concept of moving IT from a cost center into a profit center, because as you're able to have returns on IT project investment, now you can start self-funding the innovation and differentiation projects that we want to be able to do. So let's talk about where we are in the world of the industry. Let's figure out how we can create a structure of agility, and then how we can calculate an ROI so that we can see how we're paying the business back through strategic projects. So understanding the current industry landscape in the world of ERP, we're really in this crossroads. We really kind of have a decision to make here of whether we take a left here or whether we take a right here. So if we take a left, I call this the vendor-driven roadmap. So that is just doing anything, whatever the vendor tells us to do, right? So that is probably going to have to rip and replace everything that you have today into their software as a service, rented tenant model, right? You're going to just go all in on one monolithic vendor, which means you're going to innovate at the speed that that vendor chooses to innovate. You're going to have that single vendor dependency, and you're going to pick the technology first, and then you're just going to try to configure it to your business needs, all in the one kind of package. Now, you may think you don't have a choice and you have to do this. You may think that maybe this is just the easy button because this is just kind of what they're telling you to do. But I think the savvy CIOs today are going on to this kind of business-driven roadmap. And this is really picking the right tools, technologies, vendors, structures that is going to give the right mix of technologies that are going to get the best business outcomes needed and in the most cost-effective way. So it's not really one monolithic vendor. It's laser focused on choosing the right vendor, technologies, and processes that's going to reduce risk, reduce total cost of ownership, and maximize the value and innovate at the speed that you may need to innovate, that maybe those vendors aren't getting to that level of speed and agility that you particularly need. Okay, so really the reality of the situation is, as we know, is that the ERP vendors are trying to convince us to re-implement into their locked-in subscriptions, right? 99% of the CIOs and CTOs are reporting very concerning feelings about re-implementing on a vendor subscription-based licensing model because they're feeling anxious to being locked in, right? Because once you start down that path of a subscription-based model, there's no going back. And if you leave, you take nothing with you. You're going to have to completely re-implement again on something completely different, right? So we see time and time again how these CIOs are saying, we've got to figure out how we can optimize what we have today. We purchased this ERP 10 years ago with the expectation expectation that we're going to run it for the next 30 or 50 years. So how do we maximize the value of this ERP, but still continuously innovate where needed without the lock-in, right? And this is where we really need to focus in a little bit about. Hopefully I can give you some things to think about here. Now, how people go about doing that to be able to ensure this agility, right? So to be able to brace for impact and be quick for changes is this kind of modular based design. Gartner calls this composable. So there's really three different principles here. One is a modular business architecture. So you can think about this as how you staff your people into different kind of teams, right? Into kind of groups of teams that have functional outcomes in a way that if that team is not working or something changes where that team needs to be modified or completely replaced, you can take that team out and bring in another team without having to restructure and reorg the entire organization because you had to meet some sort of need. The next one is modular technologies, and that is finding the right technology that is going to meet the business objectives in the most cost-effective way, in the path of least resistance, that gets you the outcomes that you need as quick as possible. So you're choosing the right technology for the right outcomes that you need in such a way that if that technology is no longer working for you, you can take that technology out and replace it with something else as easy as possible without having to rip and replace your entire enterprise out of there just because that one technology was affected. And then finally, vendors is your vendor relationships of choosing the right vendors that are going to give you the right outcomes, specialized vendors that are going to give you the service level agreements that you need at the price that you're willing to pay, that the business outcomes that you're able to get in a modular way, so that if that vendor is no longer working out, you can fire that vendor and bring in another vendor very easily without having to completely restructure everything because you went into one single monolithic vendor approach and you can no longer now change these one little modular types of things, right? So the idea is that if you get a flat tire on the car, you can simply change that tire on the car without having to abandon the entire car itself and then go get in that new car, right? So you're trying to make as many field replaceable units where it makes sense so that you can quickly change. All right, so let's just talk about the reason why this is such an important concept now. Now is why it's so very, very, very important, why this is coming up, why Gartner's talking about this, because of where we are in the world. In order to figure out where we are in the world of ERP, we have to kind of do a little history lesson. So let's go back 30 years ago when ERP started, right? And you wanted to outsource a lot of the things in your ERP, right? So you wanted to have application managed services outsourced. Back then, what was there? IBM, Accenture? There wasn't really that many of them back then, right? If you wanted database managed services, there's a few more, right? If you wanted your support, you had to go to the vendor. If you wanted software, you had to go to the vendor. If you wanted your database, you had to go to the vendor. And if you wanted infrastructure, what was there then? Dell, Compaq, IBM, Sun Microsystems? That's probably about it, right? So in this model is very, very, very competitive. And the leverage was all with the customer. And it was a race to the bottom for pricing and service level. And if IBM upsets you, you just said the word Dell and you got whatever you wanted with IBM, right? It was a heyday in the world of ERP, of how this worked. And it was a lot of RFPs, and there wasn't a lot of players that were bidding on those RFPs, right? So let's fast forward to today where we are. So today what's happening is the vendors are now coming back and trying to take your entire IT stack into one contract, right? So let's think of a program like SAP RISE. This is a great example of that, where under one contract, they're going to include your application managed services, include your database managed services, include your support. They're going to convert and make you abandon your perpetual software ownership and convert that to a subscription-based rented tenant model, and even including your infrastructure and the hardware. And they're saying that with this idea, say you've got a single throat to choke, right? A single hand to shake. You've got one call to make, and you're consolidating vendors, and you're making this nice and easy. But really what's happening is that you're losing the modularity that Gartner and ours are raising the red flags and going, hey, careful with this, because you can't change any one of these things. Because if you want to change your infrastructure or your AMS provider or how your support provider is done, you've got to scorched earth the entire enterprise, and you're going to not be able to change that tire in the car. The entire car now becomes the field replaceable unit, right? So that's the world that we're in right now. So what we're trying to do is show a modular based strategy to pick the right specialized provider for each one of these types of things, okay? So let's just talk about how the modernizing the ERP doesn't really require the rip and replace. 57% of the CIOs are showing that you really don't need to rip and replace everything in order to modernize. And I think that's a very important concept as we move on to this. And so the decision-making is pretty easy to me, right? And I know this is a very easy diagram, but I think the world of us being in SAP, we're an SAP shop or an Oracle shop or an IBM shop, I think those days are over. Right now, we have to start with the business requirements and then agnostically find the right technology that's going to enable those things, starting with our current systems, right? So here's our business requirement. First question, can we do it with a system that we have today? These are some of the most robust softwares ever created on the planet, designed to be customized and tailored to your particular needs. In many cases, when people hear a new business requirement, they think they need a new software solution in order to enable that, when many times it can be done in what they have today. And if they can't do that with today, then they extend that platform to only get the delta difference that they need in that gap of the functionality that they need, leaving everything else alone. So if you need a new thing in the world of HR, but you have 20 different modules, then you can probably find a way to get that feature functionality in a different way without having to rip out all 20 of these modules just to get that one gap difference, right? So you're laser focused your time and effort and resources on only getting the viable product that you need, a viable enablement that you need, and only that, right? So that's the whole point, right? And that's how you can really start changing, going from cost-based decisions into ROI-based decisions and calculating that payback. Now, I'll just give you a quick example of this. This is a mid-sized company. This is an SAP example. They had materials management, FICO, sales and distribution, and production planning. Okay, they were starting to grow, and they wanted to now include HR, the CRM, and warehouse management. So they called SAP. SAP said, sure, what you have to do is move everything over to a RISE program, upgrade everything up to S4, and then we will sell you the additional modules of HR, CRM, and warehouse management. And they thought that was the only choice that they had. Then they called us, and we scenarioed it out, and we looked at all the different business requirements. And we found out for HR, they could use Workday. And it was going to greatly fit their needs. For CRM, they could use Salesforce. And for warehouse management, they can use Manhattan. So they're not redoing and ripping out the 4 modules that they have and then adding. They're only putting in the time and effort. So if you look at the 2 different ones that we had SAP, the RISE program, having an ROI of 200%, but with an ROI of doing just doing those 3 things and leaving the rest alone, we had an ROI of 680% with a year payback in year 3. This is the kind of model that you have to take to boards of directors today to justify projects and show that you've scenario modeled all different options and done real ROI to see how you're able to do one that was $13.24 million versus one that was $5 million with a 680% ROI. This is the analysis that has to happen today. So let's talk about how we evolve these IT systems into innovation engines. And I'm going to give you a way of doing this. First thing that you want to do is you want to take all the IT systems that you have today, and you want to put every single one of them in one of 3 buckets. One, is this a non-differentiating system that is a system of record or a transactional system? Maybe it's master data or shared or core or a shared service of some sort. It's mandatory, it's operational, it's transaction, but it's not innovation, it's not differentiation, it's not really moving a needle for the company. It's just kind of mandatory, right? So that's one category. The second category is this a system of differentiation, right? Are you doing things different than your competitors that are giving you an edge? And is that being enabled by this particular technology? So that's that second bucket. The third bucket is this a system of innovation, right? Is this a playground that you might stumble upon or create something that is going to be a game changer in the industry that you want to invest in to kind of move the needle, right? Now, once you put everything into one of these three buckets, you're going to be able to start seeing the different attributes of each one of these and starting to understand the time that you're taking and the money and the resources. And I think what you'll find is once you start looking at all of these systems, you're going to start figuring out that where all the time is. And I bet if you do that, you're going to find that most of the time and money that you have are actually being put in the systems of record. Probably, I would assume around 90% of the time, money, and resources you have are on those systems of record, leaving only 10% for the systems of innovation or the systems of differentiation, right? So what happens when you have this? We call this companies who are surviving in this day and age of unpredictability. You're simply just surviving and you're making it through, you're weathering the storm, but you're really just kind of flatlining, maybe growing a little bit, but you're putting way too much time in these systems of records and you're not putting enough time into the systems that move the needle. Now, CIOs, especially the new CIOs that are coming in and inheriting these new products or these new systems, they are laser focused on doing everything they possibly can to flip those numbers, minimize the amount of time that they're putting into the systems of records, getting it off their plate, outsourcing it, getting it completely off of their focus and time radar, getting that to somebody else because it's commodity. These systems of records can be treated like infrastructure, right? Other people can deal with that because that's not really unique to your business, where the systems of innovation and differentiation are. So if you take a look, this is an exercise one of our customers went through. They took all of their systems and they put it into these buckets. The systems of innovation, you can see up on top, you've got predictive maintenance, blockchain, industry power management, right? All those kinds of things, right? And then you look at the systems that differentiate as well, right? The EDL, the ETL, these are specialized integrated supply chain management in this case was something, right? So these are the things they really wanted to focus on and keep in-house, reallocate those resources, upskill the staff, right? And create intellectual property, right? That is going to be just completely available to take market share from competitors at the end of the day, right? And you take everything else and you look at these systems of differentiation, right? These are publishing, payment systems, invoice systems, ERP, HR, finance systems, HR systems, these are the kinds of things that are pretty much standard across all businesses that can be outsourced to maybe a third party. So instead of looking at those as any kind of other thing of how it's going to move the needle for the business, this is more SLA driven, right? This is now giving the problem to somebody else that's going to guarantee your 5 nines uptime, fast response time if you need to call or support. It's all going to be SLA driven, but you're not going to be thinking about it anymore. It's just going to be off your plate. So now we can upskill our people. This is great for retention too, because people don't want to work on the stuff on the bottom. They want to work on the stuff on the top. So they're going to stick around and help you with that, right? So really, at the end of the day, we want to build ourselves a nice, resilient IT roadmap that self-funds back into the business so that we can refocus on innovation, we can refocus on differentiation, and we want to question when people say we're going to do this project because we're going to modernize. That's not a business problem. Okay, we want to make sure that we're solving a business problem or achieving an objective. So when you hear things like redo, replatform, redevelop, lift and shift, or just move the cloud for the sake of moving to the cloud, these are things we should be really challenging and saying, okay, but how is that actually going to contribute to my board approval checklist? We should be looking at how I'm going to take this to a board. Whether you take it to a board or not, this is still the rationalization. Are we accelerating growth? Are we increasing revenues with this? Are we reducing lists? Are we getting better to compliances? Are we impacting corporate KPIs? These are the things that have to be thought about if that's worth it. So Again, don't implement or don't re-implement, implement, right? Extend what you have. Don't re-platform everything that you have, and innovate, and don't redo everything that you have to make sure that you have a justifiable project. So I hope that's helpful, and happy to take some questions now. I see there's some in the chat. Okay, let's see. Do we have any data on the cost to migrate between ERPs, subscription or not? For us, it's a gigantic investment to migrate, onboard, test, improve, and customize and migrate to adapt our tailored process. Absolutely. It's absolutely insanity amount of money to be able to do that. You've customized what you've had for the last 10, 15 years. To me, it's the biggest intellectual property that you have in the company, right? I mean, it is the biggest intellectual property. And if you want to re-implement and go to, say, a cloud model or anything else for a matter, especially that don't have a customizations, a lot of times those cloud model won't let you take those customizations. And the vendors say, hey, reduce your customizations and your complexity. Wait a second, that's my intellectual property. That's my unique business rules and unique logic. Absolutely. So I think what you want to take a look at is using the best of what you have today, but still being able to modernize where you need to. So if you need a particular function that's outside of what you have today, you can do that by simply extending to meet that one bit, but keeping what you have today. Software doesn't wear out. Hardware wears out, but software doesn't wear out. That'll last forever, right? So you just want to be able to make sure that you're utilizing the assets to have your fullest. That's a great question. And I don't have any data on the cost to migrate because it's just so variable. All I know is that it's probably going to take a couple of years, and it's probably going to take tens of millions of dollars, and that's just a hard pill to swallow, right? Okay, let's see what the next one. How is the traditional affected by the cloud-based technologies and services in the industry today? Everything is available as a service. Well, that's true, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, you bought that software 10, 15 years ago in perpetually, right? So you have that, you own that, so you can keep that. Anything you get net new now is probably going to be as a service model, right? But if you don't have to take what you have and rip it all out and put it into an as a service model, only the incremental changes that you have. So you're right, things are available as a service today, but to me, it's the net new stuff. You own what you own today. I would keep that, run that car for as long as possible. That juice just isn't worth the squeeze to abandon all that stuff, at least right now. And there's a lot of stuff in the cloud, it doesn't even have all the features and functionality of what you're using today. So sometimes it's not even viable, and you better do the analysis to make sure what you think is there is actually there. Okay, we are constantly shifting priorities and therefore must adjust resource allocation accordingly. Any tips for streamlining this process? Yeah, well, that's always a thing, is those shifting priorities and adjust the resource allocation. Yeah, absolutely. That goes to the business architecture and that composable or modular strategy, but it starts from the formation of the organization from the very beginning, right? So you want to be able to have those resources with it in mind that you can be able to replace them and manipulate them at will whenever needed, without having to completely uphold and uproot the entire organization in order to do that. There's also this whole concept of fusion teams, which it's a Gartner term, which I really love as well, to make sure that those priorities from an IT and business perspective are constantly aligned. And so I would look into that as well. It's a great concept. Okay, let's see. I think, are we done just yet? Let's see. No, just a couple minutes. Let's just see. Vendors will argue that the SOR must be replaced to take full advantage of data management and advanced analytics that are part of modern cloud. Can you talk about that? I'm really sorry. I'm not really quite sure if I understand that question or what SOR is. But I would happy have a conversation with you after, if you want to shoot me an email or some other way get in contact with me, because it's interesting. I'm just not quite sure exactly what that is getting to. So apologies for that. Anyways, I hope this was very helpful for everybody. Would love to continue the conversation afterwards, please feel free to get in touch with me. It's ehelmer@RiminiStreet.com. Happy to keep the conversation going. And thank you so much for Argyle for the opportunity. And I'll hand it back over.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for that was a great presentation, lots of content and quite practical. So thank you for that.
Sure.
I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today for this session. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Thank you again, Eric.
Thank you.